Greetings and welcome friends, I'm Ash, and today I would like to talk to you about the roguelike survival horror game Harvest Hunt, which, as a concept, is actually quite amazing. You and an eldritch fiend are stuck playing a game of cat and mouse in a world where the rules constantly change. Sometimes Lady Luck will favor you and you'll be chasing it with an axe while laughing maniacally, and other times you'll be forced to trudge through a poisonous swamp full of sadness and suffering. Unfortunately, a concept is all that Harvest Hunt really is. With only one monster, one location, and one objective, it only takes a couple of hours to thoroughly explore everything it has to offer. The various roguelike elements do their best to keep things fresh, but there's only so many ways you can remix your duel versus Blobbimus Bloo, the Amorphous Blob of Evil, before the tension goes away and you start thinking up stupid names for the thing you're supposed to be running away from. So if you're curious about where Harvest Hunt succeeds, as well as where it stumbles and falls flat on its face, allow me to share with you my thoughts after spending so much time running through an accursed swamp that I now consider Blighttown to be a vacation destination. Harvest Hunt's premise is very simple. You have to venture into the ailing village of Luna Nova 5 nights in a row in order to collect vast quantities of ambrosia, a magical, life-giving herb. Much like flower picking in real life, your journey will not be an easy one, as not only will the land itself rise against you, but you'll also be constantly hounded by a demonic apparition that seems to exist purely to make you suffer. To succeed, you'll need to sneak through the decrepit swampland, avoid the monster's gaze whenever possible, and collect as much ambrosia as you can before being forced to flee the village for the night. And if you're feeling particularly brave, or more likely desperate, you can also attempt to banish the abomination in order to get a hefty bonus. Doing so is no easy task, however, as usually you'll have to wound the creature 3 times before you can do the banishing ritual. And as you would expect, good weapons and tools are somewhat hard to come by in a wretched swamp. So if you want any fancy toys to play around with, you'll need to first purchase them in the preparation phase before each night. The prices are absolutely killer though, by which I mean you will have to sacrifice a very large amount of your own health in order to get them. Purchasing even a couple of items can leave you on death's door, and to make matters worse, you don't even start with the items in your inventory. Instead, you'll have to go to marked locations on the map in order to pick them up, some of which can be on the other side of the region. So while you can regenerate health in a variety of different ways, getting geared up is always a massive risk, as well as a very stressful experience, since suddenly every odd noise or gust of wind can potentially spell doom. That said, the health loss is also a very satisfying problem to overcome, as beating the odds and getting geared up lets you transition from being the prey to being the hunter. With an axe in hand, you no longer need to cling to the dank reeds for safety. You can go on the offensive, you can lure the monster into traps, and with a bit of effort, perhaps even banish it for the night. That part is my absolute favorite, as watching the monster flee in abject terror after the banishing ritual has never failed to paint an evil grin on my face. As it turns out, sometimes a little bit of righteous vengeance is really all that you need. Things get even more interesting once the roguelike elements get introduced. Each night you'll receive new cards, some of which you'll get to keep for the duration of the run, and some of which are only going to be active for that one specific night. These cards range from relatively minor upgrades that don't impact much to absolutely gigantic buffs that can grant you things like silent running, regenerating health, or even complete immunity to some obstacles. The same applies to the bad cards you'll draw every single night. These can be mild annoyances like reduced healing or a more observant monster, as well as downright hellish effects that can drastically change the entire map and how you approach it. For example, one card can turn the water poisonous. In a swamp. Once this effect is active, it is no longer a question of whether you'll be able to collect enough ambrosia to make your quota, but rather if you're even going to survive the night. After all, being confined to only thin, rickety pathways is not exactly conducive to long-term survival when you're being stalked by a murder blob. While the major effects like the poisonous water change every single night, a collection of your favorite personal buffs can be carried over from mission to mission. This is great fun because it lets you craft and enjoy a variety of powerful builds, though sadly, all this power does come at a rather hefty cost: the difficulty. Once you've done a couple of runs and acquired a solid selection of upgrades, it can become almost impossible to lose. Even when you consider that the monster can teleport near you if you ever get too far, it simply cannot do anything to you when you get some of the busted effects like health regeneration or silent running. So while I do like the concept, and especially how much some negative effects can twist the usual gameplay formula, the whole thing does feel like it needs a bit more balancing. Maybe the monster should get more positive cards of its own, cards that stick around and make it so the threat becomes more and more serious with each passing night, with the goal here being to counterbalance your own powering up. This really is necessary because poor Mr. Blobbimus really does need the help. On the other hand, the presentation is great, and honestly, I wouldn't change anything about it. In my eyes, the most important aspect of any horror game is the atmosphere, and this is something Harvest Hunt has in spades. While the visuals might not be high fidelity, they have a very grainy and unsettling quality to them. Even the lights, something that you would expect would be your stalwart ally in a horror game, just feel wrong. But I mean that in a good way. The real star, however, is the audio design. I especially have to commend Harvest Hunt here for giving each surface a very unique sound effect, with my favorite example being the transition from water to mud to land, which feels and sounds remarkably lifelike. The simple act of moving around is filled with such a variety of noises that it always kept me on edge. I very quickly became hyper aware of just how much noise I made sloshing through the water, as well as how loud of a dinner bell I was ringing whenever I tried to run across creaking bridges. All of this is then amplified by a lantern system that is seemingly inspired by the Amnesia series. In other words, you need the light in order to prevent yourself from going insane and slathering motor oil all over your screen. Yet you also cannot overindulge in using your lantern because it is a shining beacon of light that the monster can use to track you down. Unlike Amnesia, the lantern is infinite, though you do go bananas quite quickly when it's turned off. So it does still encourage careful play and a lot of sneaking around, which I do appreciate. These things combined give Harvest Hunt a truly impressive atmosphere, all the way until you realize that the monster is neither scary nor much of a threat. It looks like an amorphous blob with a mask glued to its face, and while the few tidbits of lore you can unlock do give it a bit of extra depth, I couldn't help but treat Mr. Blobbimus like an overly excited puppy that just really wants to show you its new slobber-covered toy. That said, I do have an overactive imagination, so even a big old blobby boy would have been scary if the AI was actually good enough to present a proper challenge. Sadly, it is not, as the monster is basically blind. Even if you run directly in front of it and then dip into the nearby reeds, it won't be able to find you. Light seems to only attract it if it's pointed directly at it, so just shine your light at the floor or away from the creature and you can basically do whatever you want. Like I mentioned before, Harvest Hunt does try to compensate for this by having the monster teleport after you every once in a while, but even that can be easily avoided by just continue to move, as again, the poor thing is basically blind. The end result is that the difficulty mostly came from me being impatient and trying to finish each night as efficiently as possible, rather than from anything the monster did. While I would love to wrap everything up in a positive note, there is sadly one more issue I have to discuss, and this is a very serious one that undermines a lot of the good things I've said about Harvest Hunt thus far. This is an absurdly tiny game. Despite the effort the developers put into making Harvest Hunt as replayable as possible through the use of roguelike elements and numerous purchasable items, you can see literally everything the game has to offer in the span of 2 hours. This is because there is only one map that never changes, only one monster that never changes, and only one objective that never changes. So once you figure out how the monster operates and what the best routes through the swamp are, that's pretty much it. Nothing will ever be scary, tense, or difficult ever again, and for a game that's supposed to be a survival horror, that is sadly a complete deal breaker. Usually, when I have to criticize a game, it's because the developers tried and just kind of failed at doing something. But in the case of Harvest Hunt, it's the developers succeeding at creating a compelling experience, only to then just seemingly give up halfway through. I don't know if this is because of a lack of resources, time, or simply because it was always meant to be a bite-sized game. But whatever the case may be, I left Harvest Hunt profoundly unsatisfied. Unsatisfied because I know that if it had a couple more monsters, a couple of more maps, and ideally some randomization in both the level generation and monster behavior, it could have been a game I return to time and time again whenever I get that roguelike itch. The atmosphere, especially before you realize how everything works, really is that good. Alas, as it stands, Harvest Hunt is a passing curiosity destined to be forgotten within a couple of weeks. And that is a true shame for a game that has managed to nail the hardest part of a survival horror. Harvest Hunt has me very conflicted. On one hand, it has a very intense and foreboding atmosphere, while the various roguelike elements have ended up being a surprisingly good addition to the survival horror experience. On the other hand, despite how much I like the concept, I just cannot ignore the fact that not only is there a tiny amount of content on offer, but what's there is also far too easy to remain interesting for very long. So as far as recommendations go, I would say this is a reluctant no. However, if you can get it for cheap, and you don't mind the extremely short length, I would definitely give it a try, as those first few nights can be quite magical. Thank you guys for watching, and if you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't, please do let me know. If you would like to see more, make sure to subscribe, hit the stupid bell, pet your blob, and do whatever nonsense you gotta do these days. Thank you again for watching, and I do hope to see you soon. Bye bye!